Okay, let's just jump right in. For years, we've all heard stories, right? Whispers of this parallel financial system, a shadow world where the super rich and powerful stash their fortunes. Well, thanks to some absolutely massive data leaks, that secret world is being dragged into the spotlight. And today, we're going to unmask it. It really all starts with a number: 11.9 million. That's how many leaked files came from just one investigation, the Pandora Papers. To give you some perspective on that, it's one of the biggest data leaks in history. A digital flood that just ripped the curtain back on a global industry that's built on pure secrecy. And what did that flood of data show us? A truly staggering amount of hidden wealth. Now, the estimates, they vary because, the whole point is that it's hidden. But a pretty conservative estimate puts the financial assets just tucked away in offshore tax havens at over $21 trillion. Yeah, that's trillion with a T. Which brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. It's one thing to say there's a fortune hidden away, but how? How is it actually done? How do some of the most powerful people on the planet manage to hide their assets right out in the open using a system that is, and this is the shocking part, often perfectly legal? The only reason we even know any of this is thanks to some incredibly courageous journalism. These landmark projects, like the Panama and Pandora Papers, they didn't just find a few bad apples. No, they exposed an entire industrial-scale system for hiding wealth, a secret economy running in parallel to our own. And when you look at the sheer range of people who were implicated, it's just staggering. This wasn't limited to one country or one type of business. We're talking about dozens of world leaders, hundreds of top-tier politicians, billionaires, oligarchs, celebrities. It's a truly global who's who that cuts across every part of society. Okay, so to understand how this whole thing works, we gotta get down to the mechanics of it. The World Bank has this great way of describing the people behind these schemes. They call them the puppet masters. So how exactly do they pull all the strings without ever being seen? Let's break it down. This quote from the World Bank just nails it. It perfectly explains the main tool of the trade, the anonymous shell company. Think of it like this. If you're going to move dirty money, you need a vehicle that can't be traced back to you. Well, an anonymous company, set up in a place that doesn't ask a lot of questions, that's the perfect getaway car. So, this brings us to what is maybe the most crucial term we need to understand, the beneficial owner. Just forget for a second whose name is on the paperwork. This is all about the real flesh and blood person who's actually pulling the strings and cashing the checks. This is the identity the entire system is designed to hide. So, let's look at how this plays out. On the left, you've got the legal owner. That's just the name on the official documents. It might be another shell company, or it might be what's called a nominee, a straw man who's literally just paid to put their name on a piece of paper. But over on the right, you have the real owner, the beneficial owner. The entire game is to create as much distance, as many layers of confusion as possible between these two columns. And creating that distance? Well, there's a pretty well-established playbook. Step 1, you create this complex maze of shell companies, often nesting them inside each other across a bunch of different countries. Step 2, you appoint those proxies, the nominee directors, to be the public face. And step 3, you use professional enablers, big-name law firms and banks, to manage the whole thing, which adds even more layers of secrecy and legal privilege. So we know how it works. But why does it matter? Why should we care? Because this isn't some harmless financial game being played by billionaires. This system of secrecy creates a shadow economy that has devastating, real-world consequences all over the globe. This chart really drives the point home. The World Bank found that in 70% of the major corruption cases they looked at, anonymous companies were used. 70%. And look at the tax losses. The Global South alone loses an estimated $400 billion in tax revenue every single year because of this stuff. Money that should be going to hospitals, schools, infrastructure. And look, experts totally agree. This isn't about a few people finding a loophole. As Transparency International puts it, the system itself has become fundamentally corrupt. It's been hijacked, and it's now operated almost entirely for the benefit of a corrupt global elite. So let's connect those abstract trillions to a very real human cost. This is why it matters so much. This system lets money meant for the public good just get siphoned off. It means, like this example shows, that funds for life-saving medical treatments can be stolen by a corrupt official and hidden away offshore. The consequences are just devastating for the most vulnerable people. But the story doesn't just end there in the shadows. The huge public outrage that followed these leaks created this unstoppable push for change. You know the old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant? Well, a global movement began to shine a very, very bright light into these dark corners of the financial world. You can actually see the cause and effect right here. The Panama Papers leak in 2016 was the catalyst. It sparked global protests, investigations. The political pressure was immense. Not long after, the EU passes a massive new directive. Then, a few years later, the US, which had long been criticized for being a secrecy haven, passes its own landmark law. The leaks basically forced politicians' hands. They just couldn't ignore it anymore.
What's really interesting is that different places are taking slightly different approaches. In the US, they went with a secure, private government database that law enforcement can access. The EU went even further, telling all its member states to create public registers. And the UK was a real trailblazer, creating one of the first fully public open data registers in the world. But the goal is the same across the board: end corporate anonymity.
So, with all these new laws, is the problem solved? Are we done? Well, not quite. Getting these reforms passed was a huge step for sure, but the fight against financial secrecy is far from over. Let's take a look at the challenges that are still ahead. You see, a law is really only as good as its enforcement. How do you actually check that the names being reported are the real owners? How do you fight back against the powerful people who like the old system just fine? And what happens when criminals get more creative? All of these are really tough questions that reformers are trying to solve right now. And that really brings us to the final thought here. What we're watching is a constant, high-stakes race. On one side, you've got journalists, activists, and governments all pushing for more sunlight. But on the other, you have a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is constantly finding new ways to create shadows. The battle to unmask the secret world is far from over, and the big question that remains is, can transparency actually win the race against secrecy?